I still remember the scent of chlorine and expensive sandalwood. It was late August 2024, at the country club pool, and the air was thick with the self-satisfied humidity of old money. I was supposed to be having the best summer of my life. I was 41, a senior director at a successful tech firm, financially secure, and finally getting married to Jessica. We'd been together for 5 years. Jessica was elegant, charming, and exactly what I thought I wanted, a classic, old-school partner. She worked as an HR consultant, but honestly, her real career was managing our social life and decorating our newly bought $500,000 condo. The wedding was 8 weeks out. Everything was booked: the venue, the caterer, the $15,000 dress. My anxiety was only about the seating chart. I wish, now, that the seating chart had been my biggest problem. The moment that chemically altered my life happened not in a courtroom or a dramatic confrontation, but in the echoing silence of a bathroom hallway. Jessica was finishing her swim, and I headed inside to change. I paused near the private meeting rooms because I heard my name. Andrew is smart, yes, but he's so earnest. That was Jessica's mother, Eleanor. Her voice had the crisp, brittle texture of expensive linen. Earnest equals dependable Ellie, and more importantly, it equals stable money, replied her father, Richard. A low, gravelly chuckle followed. I froze. My chest tightened into a cold knot. It was a familiar feeling, the sensation of being slightly outside their circle, perpetually being assessed. I told myself it was just old money snobbery. Then Eleanor's voice dropped, but the acoustics of the hallway made it perfectly clear. He finally signed the transfer documents on the condo, right? That was the last piece of the puzzle. Once they're married, the firm's insurance and life policy are all updated, naming her as the sole beneficiary. It's a very clean exit, honestly. I gripped the doorframe, trying to process the casual cruelty of those words. Transfer documents. Clean exit? Richard sighed. Yes, he signed them last week. The transfer of the deed to joint tenancy was crucial. The bank loved it. He practically handed us the keys to his future. I'll give Jessica credit. The way she insisted on security for their children someday worked perfectly. The blood drained from my head. I wasn't just hearing a gossip session, I was hearing a cold, methodical financial plan being discussed. And I was the mark. I didn't burst in. I didn't yell. I didn't do any of the dramatic things you see in movies. My brain, the logical, problem-solving machine that built my career, took over. I became calm, methodical. The emotional panic was locked in the basement. I backed away silently, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I walked to the changing room, sat down on the bench, and tried to regulate my breathing. This wasn't about a nasty comment or a minor slight. This was about fraud, manipulation, and a betrayal of trust that spanned 5 years. I met Jessica's family early in our relationship. They were welcoming in a reserved, slightly intimidating way. They talked a lot about legacy and protecting the family's future. I mistook their financial preoccupation for conservative values. Over the last year, Jessica had been insistent about organizing our finances ahead of the wedding. She called it adulting. Andrew, sweetie, before we merge our lives, we need to secure the big assets. It's just good business sense, she'd purr, stroking my arm. She managed all the paperwork. She had argued successfully for the condo, insisting we change the deed of our recently purchased $550,000 condo from sole ownership, mine, to joint tenancy with right of survivorship. She used the emotional lever of, if anything happens to you, I don't want to be fighting your firm or your parents just to keep a roof over my head. I signed it. The accounts, consolidating our savings into a joint investment account, which she had equal access to. The life insurance, making her the primary, sole beneficiary on my $1 million company life insurance policy. For the kids we'll have, she'd whispered. I'd always been the logical one, but I let emotion, and a genuine desire for a traditional marriage, cloud my judgment. I trusted her implicitly. That trust, I now realized, was my $1 million blind spot. I walked out of the country club and drove straight to my corporate lawyer, Peter Chen. Peter is a quiet man, known for winning complex intellectual property battles. He's the opposite of dramatic. I sat in his sparse, modern office and recounted the conversation, every word, every nuance. Peter listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. Andrew, this is not about a prenuptial agreement anymore. This is a potential civil conspiracy to defraud you of your assets. They have already established a financial foothold through undue influence and potentially fraudulent means prior to the marriage. He explained the terrifying reality. If we got married, the legal and financial entanglement would become exponentially worse, especially in a community property state. The joint tenancy on the condo meant she automatically inherited it if I died. The insurance policy was clear. Getting married was literally the last step in their clean exit plan. Peter's instruction was simple, immediate, and utterly agonizing. Do nothing. Say nothing. Sign nothing. We need a paper trail, not a confrontation. My life had instantly turned into a high-stakes corporate espionage film. I had 72 hours to legally protect myself before I had to face her family at a pre-wedding dinner. Peter immediately drafted a letter to my bank and investment firm. We initiated a temporary, immediate freeze on the joint investment account, citing a pending internal investigation into financial discrepancies. He worded it generically, using corporate language that would raise no immediate red flags for Jessica. I couldn't just change the beneficiary on the $1 million policy back to my parents. That would trigger an instant argument. Instead, Peter advised contacting my firm's HR department to request an increase in coverage with a temporary split allocation to a trust for tax planning purposes. It sounded responsible. The insurance company would need a week to process the paperwork, buying us crucial time. This was the hardest part. The joint tenancy deed was signed. We couldn't undo it without her agreement, and a confrontation would trigger them to liquidate the joint accounts and potentially walk away. Peter's strategy. We needed to establish a legal framework that showed her actions were driven by manipulation and not a genuine shared life. He sent a request to the real estate lawyer who handled the closing, asking for all correspondence and documentation related to the transfer of the deed to joint tenancy. We were looking for any emails from Jessica or her parents that explicitly showed a financial motive or coercion. For those 3 days, I lived a terrifying double life. I came home, and Jessica was humming, laying out swatches for the reception tablecloths. She was radiant, planning our future. I had to smile, nod, and make casual conversation, knowing that every time she looked at me, she saw a target, not a partner. It was the most profound, stomach-churning act of performance I've ever put on. The sarcasm helped. Oh, you're looking for an off-white linen? Perfect. The color of a clean slate after you've robbed me blind. The pre-wedding dinner was at her parents' house, a grand, suffocating mansion filled with antiques and the smell of money. I walked in, calm in my expensive suit, feeling like a Trojan horse. I maintained a relaxed, slightly dry demeanor. Richard cornered me by the bar, smiling broadly. Andrew, my boy, 8 weeks. So exciting. I see you finally sorted out the condo transfer. Great move for peace of mind. Shows maturity. I looked him straight in the eye and gave him a slow, measured smile. Oh, absolutely, Richard. I've been doing a lot of sorting out lately. Peter Chen, my lawyer, has been invaluable in making sure all my ducks are in a row. You know how important due diligence is. Richard's smile faltered for a microsecond. The mention of my corporate lawyer was a deliberate, subtle trigger. Later, Jessica tried to pull me into a conversation about the wedding band's playlist. Sweetie, everything okay? You seem distant, she asked, a practiced note of concern in her voice. I'm just focused, Jess, I said, taking her hand. I was thinking about the wedding, and honestly, the thought of all those assets getting complicated after the ceremony has been bothering me. I paused for effect, maintaining eye contact. I've decided we need to sign a post-nuptial agreement immediately after the honeymoon. Just to clarify the legal status of the joint account and the condo deed, separate all the premarital money again. I want everything to be crystal clear before we move into the next phase. Peter's drawing up the initial draft now. Her eyes went wide, not with surprise, but with genuine, unmasked fear and fury. She quickly recovered, forcing a laugh. A post-nup? Andrew, that's so unnecessary. We're partners. What did your lawyer put in your head? It sounds like you don't trust me. Trust is the load-bearing wall of any relationship, Jess. And Peter just wants to ensure we have a solid foundation. Just good business, right? I gave her a tight, insincere smile. That night she was cold and distant. I knew I had detonated their plan. The next morning, the first sign of their panic arrived. Text message. Jessica, 8:01 a.m. I tried to pay the wedding planner this morning, and the joint account is frozen. What the hell did you do? This is humiliating. Call me. You're destroying the wedding over some stupid conversation you had with Peter. Unfreeze the account now. I forwarded both texts to Peter. Motive established. Peter and I met in his office. He had the documents. The real estate lawyer found this gem, Peter said, sliding an email across the desk. It was a chain of correspondence between Jessica's lawyer, who she claimed was just a notary, and her father, Richard, discussing the best legal language to use to ensure the joint tenancy transfer was finalized before the wedding, citing a clear timeline for asset security. This email, combined with the overheard conversation and Jessica's frantic texts, was all the evidence we needed. This was not a prenup disagreement. This was a paper trail of financial entrapment. Peter's final move was the strategic masterstroke. We didn't file for a nasty lawsuit alleging fraud. That would be messy, expensive, and protracted. Instead, we sent her lawyer a letter, a highly detailed declaration of intent to file a complaint for fraudulent inducement to contract. The letter calmly laid out the evidence, the overheard conversation, the joint account freeze, the panicky text messages, and the damning email chain proving the clear financial motive for the prenuptial asset transfers. It claimed Jessica and her parents had conspired to induce me into changing legal title and beneficiary status on substantial assets under false pretenses, a common law tort of fraud. She signs a full release of all claims on the joint investment account, the life insurance policy, and all wedding-related expenses which she was liable for due to her breach of trust. The engagement is terminated. Her lawyer called Peter in a panic. No lawyer wants their client's explicit, conspiratorial emails entered into a public court record, especially when they clearly expose the client's intent to commit financial fraud. It's professional suicide for the whole family. 72 hours after sending the letter, I received the signed documents. It was over. I canceled the wedding, lost the non-refundable deposit, and spent the next few weeks undoing 5 years of financial entanglement. Jessica, realizing her calculated gamble had failed, tried one final, desperate emotional appeal. "Andrew, I love you. This was just my parents being over the top. You're going to throw away 5 years over a misunderstanding." I was standing by the door, holding the last box of her belongings. I looked at her, and the calm, methodical part of my brain finally let the emotional part speak. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Jessica. It was a strategy. I heard the architects of the plan, your parents, discussing their clean exit. You didn't love me. You loved the security and the $1 million policy. I designed a good life for us, but you and your family tried to game the schematics. I caught the flaw in the foundation, and now the entire structure is condemned." I walked out and closed the door on the wreckage of my supposed future. The divorce wasn't a divorce. It was a declaration of nullity, a legal statement that the relationship was void due to the fraudulent inducement. It was cleaner, faster, and left me completely protected. My reflection months later is a cold one. I am financially intact, my career is thriving, and the condo is back to being mine. But the trust I had was irrevocably shattered. I learned that day that sometimes, being a successful adult isn't about the grand gestures. It's about the relentless, methodical due diligence of protecting your assets even, and especially, from the person who sleeps next to you. The scent of chlorine still makes me uneasy. It's a permanent reminder that the biggest dangers in life often come dressed in designer clothes, bearing a polite smile, and carrying a strategically worded deed. I was lucky. I got the evidence I needed to dismantle the conspiracy before I said, "I do." I didn't get a wife, but I kept my life. And sometimes, that's the real success story.